Hello, hello, hello. The LUZO committee begins its work in September. So everybody knows everybody. You don't need to go through that. Hi, Stephanie. We have an agenda that starts with the selection of a committee chair and hopefully a secretary. Hi, Tracy.
Do we need a secretary for meetings recorded?
Only to
Well-
have the minutes signed.
But we're not, we're an advisory group, not a committee,
Right.
so we don't have meeting, we've never had them signed.
Well, and I'll put that right in my first, you gotta care folder, and we can move on. I'm just the liaison from the board. But in the interest of moving business forward, I would nominate and elect Gail Marshall to continue as our committee chair. Second.
Same.
All in favor?
No one else?
That,
All right, let's see what we can do.
You
The
swept the
power.
slate.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Thank you, Gail, for taking that on.
yes,
All right. And you, Kim, I mean, I got told that it would be really helpful to have minutes. So that's why that was on there.
who's gonna write them?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I did the last meeting, but I can't do that in a chair. I'm not that good at minute taker anyway. So it is recorded, correct? Yeah. We'll see how that goes, unless somebody wants to volunteer. We were gonna review and discuss the priorities in the meeting topics, and Noel has, he and I talked about this a little bit over the summer, and he has come up with a list, sort of bending things into different categories. And it's obviously a need to do list. Stephanie, you're not, maybe can't see it. We've got a need to do list. We've got a like to do list. We've got our best for comp plan discussion list. An off the table for now list and for further discussion list. And this is just a suggestion, so we can do that any way we want to. But obviously, LUZO corrections, edits and clarifications according to state law. Well, those are two separate things. If we've got any corrections and edits for the existing LUZO, we would do that. Recently enacted state laws include manufactured homes, and there's a statute about greenhouses and hoop houses. And so we'll need to have language to deal with that. The solar ordinance is something that was discussed a bit last spring, and Noel had a draft that he presented for that. We also, there's a lot of discussion with the planning board about getting better applications and checklists, so that when we're processing applications, that it's more clarifying both for the applicant and the board as well, for how to function, and apparently Noel has some of those in at least draft form. I'm not sure if that's gonna go to the planning board or
You
if
guys
that's gonna
won't,
go
you guys
here.
won't have to deal with that,
Yeah.
it was on our original
Yeah.
list, and so I just added it.
So we'll be looking at that at the planning board. I think, is there talk about maybe turning, I don't know what next time is with it. We got a couple things on that agenda. The like to do list, the subdivision rewrite, that went into limbo late last year. The original goal was to try to make, not so much change the subdivision ordinance, but make it a better ordinance to deal with. Rearrange some things, and we need to find out where that, if you haven't had a chance to connect with Andy, then maybe you and I can talk about, and Kim can talk about how we get in touch with Andy and clarify why that blew up at the last minute. The allowed table and terminology, that great big long list of definitions and the table of allowed uses is another matter. A site plan review, which would be for projects, using it as an example, 365. That would be, an example of a better way to process an application, that sort of thing.
That would be a planning board issue?
Well, that would be a different ordinance or separating, that would be a different section of the LUZO.
So-
It's in the subdivision ordinance now, or that's how we process it. Why don't you go ahead and maybe.
Yeah, so like, currently, there's two examples we can use. One is, there's a process that the land use ordinance has called conditional use review. So if I wanted to do like more of a commercial development, it would still need to go through conditional use review, but you could, if you created a site plan review ordinance, it's much more specific to like kind of a single site that's maybe commercial, and you deal with more focused on like parking and lighting and some of the other things. And the flip side, if you're doing residential development on a single lot, where it's not a traditional subdivision of land, if you can link the site plan review ordinance to that and have it be a similar process as the subdivision review, it's much more specific. So if you want to use the Hillway subdivision as an example, that was actually not a land division. It was multiple structures on a lot. And so then having a site plan review ordinance would have been a more efficient way to review a project like that, or if you're doing an apartment building or something.
So would we have to divide the issues between a subdivision and what you stated would exist within the subdivision ordinance?
Yeah.
And a separate one for any residential site plan development?
Yeah, you could have a residential site plan development under a site plan review and have it be this like akin to a subdivision review, if we set it up right.
I'm just trying to parse out the work
Right.
that we might be combining.
For this work, we'd basically just be having like, here's a site plan review ordinance that deals with those things.
Which might look in some parts similar to the subdivision.
A
ordinance.
similar, some of the
But-
similar thing, or it might look in some ways like a conditional use
Yes.
review, but it deals with
Yes,
things differently.
yes.
Well, that's. I
So
guess
if you're
my-
gonna do, if you're gonna do the subdivision rewrite, it would be a good time to figure out whether or not you wanna do that too.
Yeah, I think it makes it easier. It's not a more difficult, it's not like, let's add an ordinance to make.
No,
life
and that's my
hard.
point,
Yeah.
to incorporate it in the subdivision ordinance for subdivisions,
Yeah, I don't think it works that way.
instead of creating yet another ordinance.
Yep. I see what you're saying. I think it's a separate thing.
But it would be a separate thing within the LUZO or a separate thing
It
altogether?
would just be, I mean, we could have a unified ordinance and have it all be one of the same land use ordinance where you have subdivision review standards and site plan review standards, and this is the process you go through when you're doing certain things. It's the same thing. If you
Yeah.
had separate ordinances or if you had
I see.
a unified code.
LUZO ordinance volume 1, LUZO ordinance volume 2.
Well, and that
And-
goes
and-
directly to my point,
But I
that
think.
when we were born as a committee or advisory group or whatever, it was to aid not only Kim, but the town itself in reviewing this cumbersome document that we have known as the land use zoning ordinance. Look through it for conflicts where different things are juxtaposed and don't work well together.
Mhm.
And remove and revise and all that to bring this voluminous object down to something that is manageable. Since we started, it continues to get a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So I'm constantly looking at ways to, just like this, do we roll that into the subdivision ordinance? And let that be its freestanding thing that associates with subdivisions, and then create a subtitle within the LUZO for residential or whatever, but
Right,
just so you guys know going forward, that's always been my bent, is to make
Yeah.
that thing
Yep.
smaller, more manageable, and I would love to, in one of these items, ask Kim, and I ask her every year, to kind of put an eye toward where are those conflicts, Kim, you know, those rubs that give you the hardest problems in your day-to-day functioning. Highlight them, bring them here, where can we better either put them or do away with them? But anyway,
I
okay,
think.
I'm off my soapbox.
So can I just address the 2 points there? The first bullet under the need to do list is exactly what you just talked about. So
Perfect,
that's
and
where
that's,
usually Kim and I sit down like a couple of times over the course of the season. Kim says, hey, we really need to fix. We just talked about something at the planning board meeting last week about having to do a clarification that would make her life easier. So I think that is like that's the first bullet on the need to do list. But I would also say like any of these things that we're suggesting or that, so I didn't add any work to this list that we had, that we hadn't already talked about at the beginning of this, right after town meeting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But anytime we bring up these things, I suggest we look into a site plan review ordinance. It's always with the mindset of like, how do we make the application process and the review process clearer for somebody who's going through a project or the planning board who has to review a project. Because in doing so, it makes life easier for both the applicant and the town. Why do we need to fix the subdivision ordinance? Because there's some things in there that aren't as clear as they need to be. How can the site plan review ordinance help? Because there's sets of things that you want to look at as a community that might be better suited for a different structure than to try to live in the gray, which is what you do sometimes.
Right.
Thank you.
And I've been, you know, when we grapple as a planning board with non-conforming uses and that whole section, section 4, it's become apparent to me that what some of that is just statutory language that's just been moved, that you have to have, that's been moved, but that's not done in a format that's useful for mere mortals. And so it would be, it's hard to parse through when you're making an application. It's hard to parse through when you're processing the application with the planning board. And I don't know what the answer is, but plain language, trying to do it in plain language that also doesn't omit any legal requirements. I don't know if that's possible, but some of that stuff, it's like this, like the section, the things you have to comply with in order to be able to get be able to rebuild something, let's say. There are all these criteria you have to meet, and it's just like chunked in a paragraph. And so would it be helpful to have something as simple as break it out into bullet points? Break it out into easier to comprehend. These are the criteria you have to meet, as opposed to this is the criteria you have to meet. I find that census around in circles, and we will always have turnover on the planning board, and so we're always starting over. And that is an added factor to it. But anyway, we're gonna try to work on that at the planning board with some stuff, but I'd love to be able to figure out ways to make
That's a
the
good
document itself more friendly as best we can, but
More
maybe that's
definitive.
in another life. All right, where did we get to? Off the table for now. Now, the best for comp plan discussions, because the comp plan isn't a complicating factor here, because we're probably gonna get that underway sometime in
Yes, this,
October, maybe,
Yep,
I don't know
October.
when, October, so. That's an area where we're probably gonna need a lot of input from the community and things like that, like the maximum lot size and the density review. How does workforce housing relate to size of lots, et cetera?
I have a question, and maybe, Noel, you're the best one to address it regarding maximum lot size. Why doesn't it say minimum lot size?
Oh,
Because that's an area where the lots are really small, and rather than having you come in and buy this house and this house and this house, which are on 3 separate lots, and tear them down and then build your little McMansion, we're gonna try to keep this house and this house and this house as little houses to maintain the sense of neighborhood. And if
Okay,
you think about where these areas are, in Seal Harbor, Upper Dunbar Road, Lower
right, I
Dunbar
get
Road.
that. I was just relating it to, if I own a lot,
yeah,
why? What if it's too small to build on? Shouldn't it identify the minimum requirements for me to be able to build, rather than the maximum requirements for me to be able to build?
well, we do, the ordinance does already specify maximum, you know.
But does it
minimum lot size.
specify, it does specify minimum.
yes,
Yes, it does,
Okay.
sure,
yeah, I think
Oh,
the concept
very
is,
but this is, there would be a minimum and a maximum.
don't roll your eyes.
it's always gonna be a minimum. If you take a dense neighborhood like Sylvan City is the one that always popped up in our discussions, like we want to keep that neighborhood in the density that it is now.
Right,
Or that it is currently proposed to be if it's not there now. And so as Katrina was saying, the idea was, you know, how do you stop somebody from coming in and purchasing a bunch of small lots, turning them into one big lot, and it's like totally changing the character of that, or that neighborhood. Or the
Isn't that a
accessibility.
zoning thing?
Yeah, why
It is a-
couldn't they do it if they wanted to? If they don't want to
Exactly.
pay tax bills.
Isn't it a zoning thing?
Well,
It
they
is.
could,
It
under
is,
the
that's why
current,
we're gonna
under
say,
the current ordinance, you can.
you can,
Yeah.
but if we had maximum lot sizes in certain areas, I mean, right, then you couldn't.
It's so,
It's still very confusing. to me.
It's like the upside down of what you're used
If
to.
you buy 3 lots and each lot is identified as its own separate lot, does it meet a minimum standard or a maximum standard?
it currently will meet a minimum standard.
Exactly, and zoning tells you. Can you combine all 3 lots? Well, I'm not sure you can you?
Yes,
Yes,
absolutely right.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can.
Today you can.
But you could say there's,
And what would that be, a subdivision or?
No,
nope,
No,
No, it's just merging the lots, if they're all in the same ownership, they're contiguous.
Wow.
so there
But
are
if they're
minimum,
developed, no. If each of them have a principal building on them, you can't merge it.
I'll just be over here if you need me.
no, it's a good question.
but those are the kinds of, this would be a significant change, and so it
Yeah.
seems
Yeah.
to me. And I can't imagine the town voting for something like this if the people say who would be most affected, like in the particular neighborhoods they're talking about, weighed in on this in advance and said, yeah, we think this is overall, said, we think this is a good idea. Cause I can't imagine, I can't envision the town doing that over people's heads,
Well, and
but
I
that's
don't know,
me.
maybe I'm naive, but I thought I needed clarification on the definition between maximum lot size and minimum lot size. Because if I'm confused, maybe there's 1 or 2 other people in the town that might be as confused as me.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes,
So we ought to try and make it as clear as possible to folks as we go forward, that
well, that's why.
what it actually means.
That's why it seems to me that we either have to undergo a significant outreach into the community on this particular issue, or because the comprehensive plan is coming down the road, do it within that context. Discuss that issue within that context
Yeah.
and see how it floats.
Have you found any other towns that do that?
in certain areas, but it wasn't like easy to pull a model for this particular town. But there are areas where this is as big as you can have this particular thing. There are places like that, yes.
So you can have a lot
That's-
this size, and then if you want to decide it to the same size, you can't merge it. Is
Correct.
What you're saying,
Yeah,
because the maximum has to stay.
right.
And that's where the clarification rests.
Right,
Now I understand that.
you can have a quarter
But
acre in that area.
Looking at it, just a cursory view says, well, what the hell does that mean?
Right,
Well, here's what
Well,
this
that's really
means.
top much of
Yeah,
it.
in the context of this list, what it means is on our full working list that we had back in the
Mhm.
spring, right
Right.
after town meeting, all of these bullets were on there.
Right,
And I've separated all these bullets out into categories, like this topic is better suited for a comprehensive plan discussion first, and then the specificity will come to the LUZO committee for like, and here's how we would apply that thing in
okay.
the language of a proposal. So
Okay.
what this really means in comp plan term, in the terms of this list, is that you're not gonna deal with it this year.
and I wanna hear from, Katrina has been an advocate for this, so I wanna know how you feel about that approach to it, because, and I know that your ear is to the ground in terms of what's actually happening.
I think that we have to be gentle because people's property is their nest egg.
Yes,
So people want to be able to get the most they can for their property, but at the same time, many of the people that live in the areas that are gonna be impacted by this, hopefully, have a better sense of neighborhood
Yeah.
and community.
Yeah.
So you have to kind of think about how do you weigh that?
Yeah.
So I think coming in from the comp plan, because what I think it's trying to do is maintain neighborhoods and communities within the villages.
Right, so I would, if you're bumping it up to another perspective, then it's really identifying the things that you just said. And then, okay, well, what tools do you have in your toolkit to be able to do that? And is this one that we wanna do, or is it something else? And there's probably other things we could look at too, but the comp plan level will kind of keep it up here, and then we can say, okay, yep, here's some ideas. Let's hash through those ideas and sit, and then when like the, you'll see, either you will see a draft that is this as one option, or you won't, because we found another way to do it.
Mhm. Okay. So Noel is also proposing taking the compatibility section 6A, which
Yep, I have,
talk about, there was talk about the wisdom of eliminating that section. That seems to be off the table for now. There was in the planning board, significant discussion about that. I don't think it was complete discussion, but it was significant discussion, and there were people who strongly felt it should not be eliminated. I didn't take that position, but other people did certainly. And I think that one of the big concerns that may be able to ameliorate that eventually is making sure that the kind of generic standards that are in the compatibility section are incorporated someplace else more specifically in the review process. So if you didn't lose that ability, to me, it meant that there was more work to be, in part, to be done about discussing among the planning board to discuss what our role is. And I take this sort of almost strict constructionist view that we're there to interpret the ordinance and apply the ordinance. We're not there to sort of do anything more than that. We're not there to try to prevent a specific thing that we don't like or that we think other people won't like. If the ordinance allows it, then our avenue is to try to change the ordinance. But there's a lot of other competing opinions about that, and so it makes sense maybe with everything else we have to do to step back from that. Maybe at some forum continue that discussion, and maybe among the planning board continue that discussion. Because but maybe not as a need to do for this year. Land use map and shoreline zoning and split zoning. The land use map review is what?
so
Define that.
I put these two things on the bottom of the list because I wasn't sure which to categorize them, which other list to put them in.
Mhm.
And tonight, we're actually gonna talk about the shoreline zoning question.
Right,
And then the split zoning question, I think, I'm not sure if we need to deal with that anymore or not, and that was a question I wanted to put back to Kim, so.
Okay.
That's why I called it here today.
so, yes.
I did.
So how do people have any more feedback or ideas about how this list stands at this point? Is there anything else that you can think of that's missing or that's misprioritized or? And if you don't have a thought about it right now, think about it and then make sure you let us know either the next meeting or in an email or something so we can bring it back around again.
Things on their face, in my opinion, looks like, oh, we can dispense with a lot of these things fairly easily, but the reality is, once you get into the weeds, you're talking about several meetings on different subjects.
Yes,
And
yes,
I think it becomes a very full list for the year.
right. And we'll get into that
Just my
because
opinion.
we do need to talk about the schedule of meetings and whether or not we think we can do what we want or need to do one meeting a month, or whether we need to try to occasionally do 2 meetings a month. I saw a head shake there. But we need to discuss that at the end of the meeting, and figure out where we go from here.
I would like to add the rural wastewater rebate ordinance.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'd like to,
Is that in the LUZO?
no,
That's its own separate.
yeah. Specifically, I'd like to talk about me no longer doing the inspections on the septic tanks. And relying maybe on the contractors. My shoulders are starting to wear
Mhm.
with lifting, I'm not kidding. Lifting
I
these
believe you.
weights.
Did you ever get an assistant?
No,
No.
no. So I would like to somehow discuss, and I don't know how we're gonna write this up, I already had it done once years ago, but you know, kind of relying on the contractor that the property owners hire to either provide a report or, and I don't know how these contractors feel about this, but
You did not get an assistant.
I have not. You mean a deputy CEO?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes.
No, no one's applied yet.
Is it advertised?
It is now on the website, I just found out it hasn't been on there, and I don't know where it's been advertised beyond that.
can you listen
So-
to that, Mr. Selectman?
And it's been
Oh,
available,
you bet.
it's been on there, it's been available since May, so anyway.
Oh, yes, I know.
In the LUZO is the way, is your,
No,
that's not in the LUZO.
No, it's the rural wastewater rebate program.
So do you think that's something that the select board needs to deal with?
No, I think it's town meeting,
We can work on it, Kim.
Okay, all right,
but that's something I would like to have done
Sure.
at this May town meeting. I'm getting older and, like I said, it is wearing and tearing on my shoulders. I'm lifting those lids by myself,
yeah.
because 9 times out of 10, no one's there
Right.
to
And
help me. So
I
anyway,
think, aren't they supposed to have them opened for you?
they're supposed to have them readily available for me.
Well, we may need to just change the
So-
language that they need to have them open for the scheduled time that you will be there.
But I guess we also have to ask, how many of these do you end up having to do every year?
Oh, my
You've got
God.
So much to do. I mean, it's not a rotating thing.
But it does, it rotates every 4 years, but I have 104 this year.
Yeah, I mean,
And there's over 350, 360 on this program.
Yeah.
I don't,
There's a
yeah,
lot.
I think there's probably a better use of your time.
And I do, I mean, I could do a lot more other things than
Yeah,
go
there
with
is.
somebody's septic tank. It takes a lot of time because it's from May to November and that's my busy time.
Yeah.
Seems like you really need just proof that it has been,
Well, they gotta look at the baffles, the whole purpose is looking inside the tanks and looking at pumps to make sure they're functioning.
And that may be a factor of connecting with their plumber,
Could be, I
who
don't.
signs off on
Well,
their,
see, plumber's only responsible 2 feet beyond a building. After that, it's,
Isn't that a J.R. Anderson thing?
and J.R. Anderson's the one that.
they're only
they look
responsible
at-
for that, but
Yeah,
when I first built my house, this town was accepting affidavits from plumbers who certified that they had viewed the septic system and found it to be intact and functioning.
you could, I mean,
Because Wilbur Terry used to,
oh, I'm not aware of that.
that's
but-
way back, he used to see mine and just sign a piece of paper and I brought it over to the town. And they certified that, yeah, okay, he's been inspected,
but you could treat it like a mooring inspection, really.
basically, yeah.
I mean, I just, yeah, whatever, you know.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of options that might take you out of the picture.
Which would be great, because like I said, there's more things I can be doing than scheduling these inspections.
Yeah,
Well, see, that's where I'm looking for those little niches where the LUZO gets a little bit smaller
Yeah.
in terms of what your responsibilities are.
Good,
Rather
All
than
right.
paying $112,000
So you're gonna work with
a year
Kim on
for
that.
somebody who can't even.
all right. So they're gonna work on that.
can I just add
Yeah.
a couple of things? One is, so the need to do list, the way I looked at it was, these are the things that we definitely will be doing this year.
Mhm.
And then the like to do list, those are things that we could, if having given time or coordination with the attorney or whatever, will be working on. And it could be, we work on it partially this year and partially for next year's town
Yep.
meeting or some of these other things. But I would add, I mean, I would think like the like to do list, we could make as long as we want. And then we have to continue to prioritize, okay, what do we actually have time? And what does the town have capacity for, taking in at
I
any
would-
particular town?
I would suggest that the, following up on that like to-do list, everyone here knows that as we get going in our business, all of a sudden we get requests from different
Yeah,
entities saying, oh, we need to look at this, we need to have something before town meeting. Well, that will go in the like to-do list,
Yes,
you know, and prioritize it in terms of what came in, when it came in,
right,
and we'll deal with it when we get to it.
right,
Have we dealt with
right,
it
and we
before?
should probably establish a cutoff date too. We had a little problem with
Yeah.
that last year. It
Mhm.
was like,
Yeah.
okay. And that would probably be best accomplished if I sat down with Claire and went through her calendar leading up to the town meeting and the warrant preparation and said, okay, let's back it up and see when we should draw the curtain on.
No, can you elaborate on the recent enactment?
Yeah, the deadline is
of the
great for-
There's a new LD.
We'll put that on our
number that we
2025
have to
agenda.
make sure we don't have to change anything. I'll share, I can send it to you, because I haven't actually looked at it.
This is the
I also
2025
sent the repeal
So
of the
if you
mobile
just-
home ordinance that the
Yeah.
town has, that was never repealed.
Yep,
That needs to be done through this 2025.
That's mobile home, you said?
Yeah.
Need to be.
With Janet Mills' recent, legislation, she's now allowing people to put old mobile homes on their properties.
Yeah.
Instead of having a specific year.
Like any year?
Gail,
Wow. And no
I've
inspection?
already done the thing that you're
Interesting.
talking about, meaning.
And we have an ordinance that currently.
Oh.
Now, will that come in conflict with our junkyard ordinance?
Boy, it's there.
No,
Boy, that was a silly statement, wasn't it?
Those things up, man.
Something
Okay.
said.
Yeah.
But we should talk about that. before
Yes,
you-
thank you.
Well, we have a mobile home ordinance that was never repealed back in the
Right.
70s. But it's stated in that ordinance that you can't have older mobile homes unless they're on a mobile home park.
Right.
Right. So now we have to repeal that.
All right,
Okay,
Or revitalize it.
We can be stranger.
That's right.
discussion on shoreline zone.
yes. Okay. So I think the topic of discussion was, before last week's town meeting, there was some discussion about whether or not we should change the mapping for shoreline zoning and how we deal with all that from a mapping perspective. So I thought, before we, or as we're contemplating that discussion. That, I don't know if everybody, to me, it's sort of like, let's take a kind of a 101 view of how the ordinance addresses shoreline zoning at this point. And then decide, I mean, it might make sense to me, but not to anybody else, and so if it doesn't, then we need to make some tweaks to the shoreline zoning and how it all works out. So currently, there's a bunch of different land use, so in the town of Mount Desert, there are two different things. They're, on this map, they're called zoning districts, but they're districts, and then there's a shoreline zone. And on this map, the shoreline zone is the thing that's all around the town, wherever there's water, back from the normal high water line, back to 250 feet. That's the shoreline zone. That's what's mandated by the state. And then underneath that is what is called it's a zoning district or a land use district. And so because of the history of the way the town was, there's certain districts that are called shoreline commercial districts or shoreline residential districts. Those have a separate set of uses than section 6C of the ordinance, which is all of the state mandated shoreline zoning stuff. So anything that is within this little hashed area, those are where all of the state mandated standards come into play.
That's the purple.
That's this hash
This.
right here.
Oh, I see.
These
Oh,
little-
okay, the
whole
hash.
thing, the hash marks.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So that, on this map, that hash mark represents the state mandated shoreline zone. The only time that the state mandated shoreline zoning standards combine with the land use district standards are in the allowed uses table, because we have to make sure that what's allowed in these areas that are like an SR5 or an SR2 or a shoreline commercial are the same uses that are allowed in state mandated shoreline zones. So there's a couple of different questions that need to be thought about. One is, if one is worried that lot coverage requirements are different between the shoreland zone and any other district, or some of those sort of dimensional standards that apply. Do you want to, so it needs to be clear that this is how this town works. That's the first thing. So I'm rambling all over the place, but I want to make sure everybody understands that anything in your land use ordinance that's state mandated, for the most part, may have some examples where that's not necessarily true, but is under section 6C
of the land use ordinance. So if your property is located in any one of these hashed areas or within 250 feet of the normal high water line of a water body, that's where you have to deal with 75-foot setbacks. That's where you have to deal with counting your driveways and all non-pervious or non-vegetated surfaces for lot coverage and this or that, whatever those things are. Where it starts to become confusing for people, I think sometimes, is if your lot goes beyond that 250 feet, then there are rules in the state law that say if your lot is wholly or partially within the
Yeah.
shoreland zone, which is only this area, you have to meet these other set of standards.
Right.
So even if we changed the rules and made all of this and brought down, like, say, we're gonna take this purple line here and just brought it and make, oh, that's not a good example. Trying to find one. If we
Well,
took
like here,
yeah, maybe if we wanted to make a map change and call all of this area RW2 and bring that line right down to the shoreland zone and only have this shoreland residential 3 be the 250 feet. If your lot, it touches the shoreland zone, you still have to meet shoreland zoning, some of those shoreland zoning rules. It doesn't matter if you're in an RW district or an SR district, you still have to meet those standards.
Gotcha.
Right.
So,
Because as it
And-
defines,
Yep.
shoreline residential 1, 2, 3, 5 are areas with uses similar to other residential districts, but which are located in part or in whole
Yep.
within the shoreline
and that
zone.
is true.
That's how, that's,
I have a difficult time explaining to folks in Hall Quarry why the non-shore side of the Hall Quarry Road is 1 acre to build,
Yep,
but
Yeah.
the shore side of the Hall Quarry Road is 2 acres to build.
right.
Even though, based on where the overlay falls.
Yep.
They may not be in the shoreline zone.
Right, so to me, that's a land use question.
Yes.
When we take a look holistically at the town and say, okay, does this area really make sense to be 2 acre zoning or
Right.
1?
I don't know the answer to the
It
question.
has, but it has.
I can't tell.
well,
It has
it's a
very
legislative question.
Well,
I mean, it's
the
not
town
like,
legislative.
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah, it's a
yeah.
policy question from the town. So it has it has less to do with the fact that some properties are in the shoreline zone and some aren't.
Right.
so density review,
Yeah, so to me,
maybe.
that would be a question like, oh, wow, we really think this area, there's some areas where I do think would be really interesting to look at. How Quarry might be a great one to say, does it still make sense for this to be RW3 or should it be something else? Like, then I think you wanna, I mean, it really is that's an interesting question. I just think it does get confusing because when you look at other towns, sometimes you say like, well, Tremont only has their shorelines go back 250 feet. But that still doesn't take away the problem of having your property go back way more than 250
But that's
feet.
their-
You still have to meet those standards, right? So I've always said, like, your ordinance is set up the way that it needed to be set up because you decided to combine the shoreline zoning rules and the
Yeah,
LUZO way back, several years ago, but it does address both of those things. And so if the real fundamental question is, why does my lot have to be 2 acres versus the next door lot, which is 1 acre, then that's a different question.
right. Okay.
Right,
It's a map change, but it isn't the map change of taking all of these land use districts and bringing them down to the 250 feet. It's a question of, does the underlying zoning district actually make sense for that area?
Gotcha.
I think I'm explaining that well, and I'm open, I think you guys need to direct me in whatever way makes sense for the town. But it isn't always clear, and the only way I know it is because I deal with it like literally every day, so.
I just want to know
wanna
how to
make-
answer people's questions.
Yeah, but I think it's a question like, I don't know, that's a good question, we should have a discussion about why, what is the density in Hall Quarry, what should it be? And let's have a meeting in Hall Quarry and talk about it.
well, there's a specific question that John March brought, are you part of that question? No, okay,
know.
that John March
That I
brought to
know
us about an SR5 lot that a member of the family has bought, and there was some concern about not being able, I thought it was not being able to build more than one building on that lot,
Dwelling units,
dwelling units. And why is that?
because the lot is wholly and partially within the shoreline zone, so 6B 11 4 says if you're gonna add multiple structures, uses, or dwelling units, you gotta meet the dimensional requirements for each dwelling unit. So he would need.
Oh, 5
So
acres and
so we
5,
need 5 acres.
5
for one
acres and
house,
5 acres.
for two, 200 feet.
So the real question there is, why is it 5 acres there?
That's the question.
That's the question.
Could be.
And that's a complicated question with a complicated answer, I'm sure, because that's gonna impact. You can't spot a 1 5 acre lot. It's gonna be, how many people in Pretty Marsh wanna have 1 or 2 acre lots in the shoreline zone? Maybe, I mean, that's something that, again, that sounds like a comprehensive plan discussion to me.
Yes, I believe
Um,
it is.
I'm gonna solve a lot in the comprehensive plan.
I
aren't
don't know
we?
about that, but it'll trickle back down to you guys, but with some guidance from
Yes,
the comp plan. I think the future land use map discussion in the comp plan is,
Kick that can
It's gonna
down
be
the road and it comes back all dead to that.
yep.
yeah,
It'll be
right.
it'll be clunker by then, but
Right,
yeah, that's exactly the way the process should work,
okay,
Oh,
in my opinion. However, I could be directed.
I told
no,
you
that's
about tonight's
helpful.
meeting, I don't know what surprises.
That's very helpful.
But,
Yeah,
Um,
but I think it gets confusing for people that if you have shore frontage and your lot goes back more than 250 feet, you have to meet shoreline zoning standards, and that's the
Right.
one of the ones that Kim's talking. I get asked this
Yeah.
question all the time. I'm sure Kim gets asked this question almost every day, like, why can't I do
yeah,
this?
Often,
I mean,
Yeah.
many times we get applications that have, they're in 2 different zones, because one of it is this, is, like, we've got a little subdivision thing that has, it's quite a ways back, but there's like a little appendix on that 6 acre piece that's quote 250 feet from a water body, and so shoreline zone requirements have to be met in
That's right,
addition
yeah.
to the other requirements.
You should also know that technically, if you're associated with a 10 acre wetland, that is a shoreline zone that needs to be dealt with. We don't map them because some of them we do, but
Wow.
We have some that
Yeah,
are.
some
and
of them
then
are
you also
mapped.
get stream protection.
yeah, stream
Yes.
protection, like
Yes.
these things are all streams.
Fine.
So, I mean, there's like, it's important to read the definition of what is a shoreline, how does shoreline zone apply? What is shoreline zone? It's those, and we don't have any control over it. It's not anything the town can change.
On a very tangential, or maybe not, matter, Kim, I think there'd been some discussion about whether or not we needed to look again at the actual current dimensions of our shoreline zones, like the 250 zone throughout the town, is that?
Got a state overlay?
Yeah,
The zone line is now different, and so the whole shoreline is very different now from where it currently shows on our maps. So
So,
it needs to be changed, and this is gonna push more people inland that it becomes shoreline zoning.
right, so the way I look at that is you can even see like over here as an example, like this line. The line that is used, this is all based on the GIS, layers, shape files, and so the original line along here actually bumps in out from where this cove is.
mm-hmm,
So if you were out actually in the field measuring
Yes,
250
you
feet
would
from
be
here, you'd be way back
back
there.
here.
And so what Kim's talking about is Kyle is able to get updated shoreline shape files, which are
Yeah.
gonna be a little more accurate because of the new technology than this particular overlay, which is gonna change the zoning map to be more reflective of what's there.
And it
But
has
that-
changed.
It will change,
is
yeah.
the state,
But that doesn't also that doesn't also mean that, okay, because the way I look at a zoning map is like, this is an indicator of where your property is in relation to where you think it is, but you still have to go out in a lot of cases and find out like, okay, particularly on the shoreline, like here is the point at which we're measuring from, and we could
Right.
actually get into some arguments about where you're supposed to be measuring from, but because in the town's ordinance and in the state shoreline zoning, it says the normal high water line. When you're going through DEP permitting, you have to use the highest annual tide. And then there's like a discussion, well, what is the highest annual tide? And if you get online, there's actually something called the highest astronomical tide, which is what some people use, which isn't the highest annual tide, it's something totally different. And so how do you go through all that process. So the zoning maps are like indicators of where you are in relation to like these land use codes, but you still, there's always that, you know, level of effort that you could go through to figure out like, oh yeah, well, this part of my property really isn't, you know, here's where I would meet the setback. Like Kim's gonna ask, like, how did you determine that your house could be here and not here?
Right. Is there any sense that there's a requirement or a desirability to alter this map? I mean, is the state requiring us to use the newer technology to indicate what is and isn't shoreline of that 250? Or otherwise, depending on where we're at, or is it sufficient now to do what we're doing on the individual
I think
application basis?
Probably Kyle's gonna want
It
to
should be
update it
updated.
based on like
It's gonna have
current
to
data
be
because there's
reviewed, it's
probably
gonna
some
have to
assessment
change it.
implications there too.
But it's a big to do, because we have to notify everybody now. That's gonna go from completely like a VR one to now shoreline residential 1, 2, 3, or 5,
Mhm.
and VR one.
Yeah.
But I mean, we haven't seen a copy of what the implications are yet, but I guess to me that gets back to like, oh, let's see what that really means, because again, that's a separate question. So if the hash line is getting bigger from a different point, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to change the underlying zoning district from a this to a this.
Right.
So we have to go through all that to make sure that we're doing it
Well, we
right.
got, VR 1 and 2 zoning, the dimensional requirements, shore setback from water bodies is NA, because they don't
Right.
have it. So you do gotta change.
Yep.
Same with R2s, R1s, and there's no setbacks from wetlands or water bodies and streams, because there supposedly isn't any in those zones.
So what do you
Change.
envision this committee doing with
Well, I think
that
at
issue?
at this point,
What would be the most?
Kim and
helpful?
Kyle and I need to sit down and understand what the full implications are, and then we'll come up with a action plan to,
We can show it existing and then.
Here's how we're gonna deal with it.
propose.
Okay,
and then at some point is this something we're gonna do with this year, or is it something we're gonna do with next year? How do we do all that?
okay. All right. Any other questions?
But the point for me tonight was just to sort of, again, it's a kind of I most of the time think I understand it. And sometimes I'm just like, what? Did we write that? But it's, just to be clear, like that, this hash line is an important part, and it is the shoreline zone. And then there's zoning districts, which have kind of a different question.
And they're all mushed together.
And the hash line is a moving target
Yeah,
of sorts.
yeah,
Somewhat.
Well,
I mean,
climate change it is.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
yes, they will
But then-
continue to change.
And the normal high water line isn't always the same.
Not always normal.
Yeah,
That's way better.
and every year the highest astronomical tide can change, so that makes a difference.
Well, we see that, you know that.
Or the highest annual tide,
This
sorry.
way, you know that.
No, I'm-
All right.
All right, thank you for that. So we're gonna stand by on that one.
That's a good idea.
I'm gonna stand by on that one.
I don't think we'll be wrestling with it tonight.
No, so, going back to the beginning, we have a solar ordinance. And I don't know if anybody's had a chance to read that recently, but if you don't have a copy, we should make sure that people get copies of the proposed draft.
Yep.
I read it last spring and I commented to Noel that it struck me that there was a lot of, talk about the size of ordinances, that there was a lot of redundancy in it, a lot of sections where the exact same language was repeated for the different size solar projects.
Raise.
There was like, it was different.
I
I
guess
thought there was a way to structure the ordinance without changing the content, but
right out of the gate, I guess my question would be why a solar ordinance?
Well,
I know ordinances have everything to do with regulation and.
well, in the
control and
same
all
way that we
but-
have a Sultan power ordinance. Or the ordinance.
Well, that's a
or
land
something
use
like
issue
that.
of where you can put them.
Yeah, well, that,
So why do we need a separate solar ordinance?
Well, I think it's a good question for Mount Desert in particular, in terms of what our land is likely to be economically viably used for, but if you go off the island and you see all those the large solar projects everywhere.
Mhm.
That tend to sometimes rile people and make you question the type of use that that's being put to, or if your neighbor decided to suddenly put a solar array, mounted on a pole, kind of solar array between you and them, would you care whether or not there was any sort of LUZO requirements for how that gets cited and how it gets buffered and how it gets?
My purpose in asking the question is that as we develop a solar ordinance, we need to be abundantly clear in the beginning that this is our goal statement.
Yeah,
This is our objectives.
Yeah.
This is what we wish to accomplish.
Yeah.
So that it's abundantly clear to everybody reading it.
Yeah.
That this is where you can put them, this is where you can't put them, this is how big they can be, or whatever.
Right.
But it has to be spelled out rather than just creating a regulatory document.
Right.
That says you can do this and you can't do that. We need to be abundantly clear as to why we want to regulate where they can be, how big they can be. All those kinds of things, like putting them on top of parking lots.
mm-hmm,
Great idea,
mm-hmm,
but to what extent do you do that? You know, is the goal to optimize their ability to generate electricity for a certain area of the community?
Mhm.
Or is it to create shade for cars that want to park underneath, get
I
out of the
like
weather?
I like doing multitasking, but.
So, anyway, that's
The
why I raised the
purpose-
question.
The purpose, which is paragraph 1, is that it is in the public interest to encourage the development and use of solar energy systems as a clean renewable energy source and to help promote sustainable initiatives in town. The purpose of this section is to facilitate the effective and efficient use of solar energy systems while protecting the public health, safety, and welfare of all citizens.
Exactly where I was going.
Right, so that's there. Maybe what we ought to do, there is, and then there's alternative language that's been noticed for this too. Maybe what we ought to do is make sure that everybody, can we resend everybody a copy of this ordinance? The attachment of this ordinance, and we can take a, it's not, I read it pretty quickly, it's not. And then maybe discuss this at the next, dig into it at the next meeting and try to. Cause it's been a long time since it was brought up.
My question was more of a cautionary note
Yep.
rather than an inquisitive note,
Yeah,
to make sure that we don't create something that is going to cause a wee bit of fervor at town meeting.
mhm,
What's this all about? We need to
Right.
be as clear as we can possibly be.
right.
Fervor is good.
We'll always try to avoid
Hey, hey.
fervor, but.
If I have to pull this car over, young lady.
I don't. Just to preface the discussion we're gonna have next time is, I think the concept wasn't even to create a separate solar ordinance, it would be to add that
Yes.
stuff to the land use ordinance.
Right.
So, like the cell tower.
6B23 and then
Yeah.
the 6B
Yeah.
section.
But then again, it still needs to be as clear as possible for
Yep, and,
Joe average citizen to call it up on their computer and read it and go, oh.
and the genesis was because of the work that's being done with the
Yeah.
sustainability committee and some of the
Yeah.
things that the town wants to do. When we allow them to do that.
All of which is going forward, I believe.
So I understand, yep,
Yeah.
but we have to do this and that.
Yeah,
Okay, so are we comfortable doing that next time? We'll put that on the agenda for next time?
Yep.
Okay. And I'll just touch for a moment. 6 o'clock. On the applications and checklists. Now that's. That's gonna be the planning board.
Yep.
So let's leave that. That's gonna be on the planning board agenda. I'm gonna try to talk with you about the subdivision rewrite and see where our status is on that.
Yep.
The revised allowed table and terminology is physically dense. I mean, there's pages and pages and pages of definitions and pages and pages and pages of proposed changes to the allowed uses, but we need to remember when groaning about that, as one might reasonably do, is that right now, if a particular use isn't included in the LUZO, it can't be done. And, it's meant to be an exclusive list, so that's why it may be worth looking that section of that table over. And this is the list of proposed definitions. I actually liked a whole lot of them. I thought that they were clear and I tell you, and when trying to learn the LUZO, there are so many times I'm looking at the provisions and I find myself saying, I wonder if there's a definition for that word. And I go, oh my God, there's a definition for that word. And it's very, very, very helpful. And this just I see this as kind of cleaning up and expanding that access to the meaning of those terms. That's how I read this. And it tries to include things that we don't already have in there, but like I noticed funeral home. Function hall, lodge, clubhouse, fuel storage, depot bulk, and all of these don't need to be absorbed en masse. It could be pick and choose for any of these, but it would require us going through this to do that. And then going through the land use categories and figuring out what we want to propose would be allowed and where and what type of district, or is it a conditional use? Is it the CEO? Is it allowed? Is it planning board? To me, that's a big,
If it makes it more user-friendly, then it's a task well undertaken.
yeah. So that, I don't know if we still people have those definitions. I think we got those last May too. If you don't, then we should let him know and she could send. No, sorry, no. And you could send out another document. Maybe you should just do that. Just send that out if you have that available.
Yep.
And then the uses are in. I don't remember, did you do a brand new use?
I did.
Was it?
I can't remember.
Well,
Yes.
I'll just send them both.
He submitted it. First,
Yeah. Probably some highlighted ones in there that
yeah.
are the ones that are
Yeah.
new.
okay, maybe you could include that too.
I'll just send them both.
Alright, you just sent them both?
No, I will.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm not.
All right, our schedule.
And like Gail said, if the use isn't in the chart, it doesn't mean it's excluded, it just means that if you see it used in there that's similar,
Yes.
that you can go to the planning board and say, hey, this is what I wanna do. Is it similar to this use, or do you see their use in the chart that this may be able to be classified under?
Right,
I think adding more uses it would be good, but I also think more definitions are great, because
yes,
if the use is in the chart, you have to have a definition for that use.
right.
People aren't saying, well, this is, doesn't say you can't do this. Try to make it as clear as possible.
Okay,
That's the goal.
all right,
Some communities, if it isn't in the allowed uses table, it is not allowed.
period.
There is
Yeah.
no, like, wait. I didn't know that.
But you can't put every.
I'm not saying we should do
in a-
that.
you can't put
Right.
every use in a table.
Yeah.
If there's something similar, like it says, use is similar to CDL or use is similar to a conditional use permit. They have the ability to come before me or the planning board to say, you feel this use is similar.
Yeah, that's, I'm just saying that's,
It just shouldn't mean it's excluded just because you don't have it in your.
That's right.
this town has some provisions that are more flexible than other places, so
Be proactive and identify excluded uses.
we could do that.
Yeah,
That's
that
a
would
nice
be.
way to think about it.
If we're keeping with our current schedule, then the next meeting would be October 15th. At 5 o'clock, that's the third.
We'll preview following
Tuesday.
customs at that meeting.
Great. Thinking about it now.
And do you wanna hold off on my ever popular suggestion that we maybe meet more than once a month for now?
Oh, yeah, I'd like to hold off on that.
Second.
Don't put that on the back burner.
Okay.
I don't think it's a bad idea, because December and,
We end up coming up against it in January anyway.
well, yeah, exactly,
I
and
know.
I should, you don't wanna be doing that, I mean, as much as I don't want any more meetings at night either, but it's just, I feel that we come to the end, we're crunching, we're scrambling, and I think it's.
But we've had to crunch because we've had stuff thrust
But-
upon
but-
us.
We could do
That's
like
right.
Zoom, like do Zoom meetings if we can't, like if it's a snow day or something. Have someone come down and just turn that on, like Katrina, because she lives close by, then.
I have no
then
electrical
We
ability.
can all chat on Zoom, but.
She's technically impaired.
Yeah, I have two technically. My question is this, can we check with Chuck? Because he's not able to come quite often because he has a standing Tuesday night meeting. And I
Uh-huh.
never remember if it's the second Tuesday or the third Tuesday.
Mhm.
So can we, if nobody else minds, can we check with him to make sure he's a Tuesday availability?
If he can do, and can people do the second Tuesday?
Well, that's kind of what we were doing with Bill Hanley, hence the reason why he can't be at meetings, is Tuesdays did not work for him either, the third Tuesday. And we chose not to change it because there's not a lot of flexibility in the calendar because of all the other committees and board meetings.
Okay.
Because we're gonna end up with, well, we're not yet, but Tuesdays, I think, is when warrant committee meetings. Right?
Yeah,
but
but we
warrant
weren't out of
committee-
here before.
Warrant committee.
They
begins
mean
at
usually meet at
6.
yeah.
Yeah, so we get out of here before, but granted, we have an hour, but, or
So,
maybe we can start sooner, I don't know, but that's, I mean, or we go down the hall.
Pick a new venue.
Hey, there's an office in South Starborough, you guys can come to.
You know, before the world of Zoom, people were actually invited to attend meetings. And if they showed up, great. If they
Yeah.
didn't, well,
well,
it's on them.
so you want me to check with Chuck and find out if the second Tuesday
Well,
is.
no,
works?
because,
It's not gonna work.
It's not gonna
never
work.
mind.
You said there, okay,
Can I make a suggestion also? We have 3 meetings, 3 months, October, November, and December, before we're gonna start our public hearings in January.
Mhm.
So what I think would be really helpful is if we could talk to the town and say like, here's the reserve meeting date in October, here's the reserve meeting date in November, here's the reserve meeting date in December. That if we need those dates, they're already like plugged in. To the
The other-
2 hour.
the other possibility is that we do 2-hour meetings,
We could definitely do 2 hour meetings, and we probably will.
What?
2-hour meetings instead of 1-hour meetings.
But I'm thinking we should try to get as much done during our regular monthly meetings as we can.
Yes.
And then if we have those meetings like kind of in the queue, if we need one, we probably won't in October, but maybe as we get closer to the January stuff, we might wanna have a second meeting. We already know kind of when that is, so we can schedule around it.
Okay,
But I'm looking at, I mean, there's 3 meetings between now and when we have to start public hearings. It's really like the things on our need to do list are gonna pretty much be it.
well, let's plan on having a longer meeting and getting through more of this stuff next time. And
Makes sense.
As long as the room's not needed after 6 p.m.
Yeah, we got lucky tonight.
Otherwise, we change the venue.
is the, alright, so we should check with Claire, is Claire the master? Who, is it Jen?
I have access to the shared calendar.
Oh, okay. So you wanna what?
For the October 15th, you mean?
Yeah,
Yeah, let me go look.
okay,
I actually thought they were already supposed to be there.
yeah.
Which is what I put in my calendar all the time.
For what, 2 hours?
Most meetings I just block out 2 hours, just because you.
They locked me out of it,
I don't know what she's gonna do. That's gonna be a lot too.
Code.
Yeah, I'm not advocating for 2 meetings a month unless we need them. I just think it's nice
No, me
to have-
either.
to know when,
I have
if
too many
we have
meetings a
one,
month
it's gonna
now.
be this. And that helps me because at least in October, where I'm like, hey, we should have a second meeting this month, and then we're all looking through to figure out when it's gonna be.
I also like what you proposed last spring was, and I think you did this last spring, was this is our calendar and this is what we hope to accomplish by each one of these dates, to sort of keep us as rigid as possible.
Right,
On
Yeah.
task,
right,
yeah.
yes,
I think that's really important.
And we talked about this when we met
yeah,
Yeah.
before this meeting, which is now
Yeah.
that we know kind of what our, this
Yeah.
list kind of then will then translate into this.
Yeah, perfect.
But it's, I mean, there's not a lot of time for what I think we're gonna end up working through.
But I definitely think 2 hour meetings is almost necessary.
Yeah.
Trying to get a lot done in an hour.
And then if we have time, we can do the like to do stuff. I think, did we have, the allowed use of state law, that's on the like to do list, right?
that is on the,
Yes, it is. Oh,
yes,
excuse me.
I mean, there's
like
some of
to
the
do,
things,
to do.
the way I look at them is like, there's some things that are, there's no pressure to do it. Like
Yeah.
the allowed uses table works, everybody knows how to use it. There's probably a way to make it better. And we should spend some time trying to figure out what that is. But it doesn't, we all have to understand it before we can start talking to other people about it. And if we're like up against like a solar ordinance or some things that Kim needs to do for, so that it's very clear in the
Right.
ordinance what's gonna happen, then we should do those first and then worry about and then continue to work on the like to do's. The risk is the like to do's keep getting bumped down to the bottom. So we
Right.
just have to keep working them into the schedule.
on the subdivision rewrite, does it make sense for us to try to set up? I mean, I could come here, and you could Zoom if you want to, a Zoom meeting with Andy and say, where are we?
Yep.
Why, I still to this day don't know why it got jettisoned.
Yeah.
What do we need to do to get it back on track?
Yep.
And what do you need to do, Andy, to get it back on track? Cause I had this suspicion that it was in part because his office hadn't actually processed it.
Yeah, I think we need to spend more
In
time
detail.
on it, Gail. It's probably wasn't good enough. We should make it good.
Okay,
And so now we just have to get back on them. But there's a core there that we just need to figure out what sections we need to work harder on.
so we get in touch with him and say, we wanna resolve these issues, and then 2 weeks from now, can we talk?
Yeah.
When you had a chance to look at it,
Is that that's a separate and freestanding ordinance, isn't it?
It is.
Then my question becomes, why is this committee dealing with it? This
well, the
is
planning
for-
board deals with it, but the planning board administers it.
And that's fine. Why is this committee dealing with it? This is for the land use zoning advisory. Board.
Right, I think that's a.
I'm just
technically a
asking the
real
question.
Yeah, I think that's,
So there's absentee voting that day in this room till 4:30.
Till 4:30.
Yeah, so we should be available after that.
okay,
And then is it,
Alan Kimberly resigned from this board.
Wow.
He's on 4 committees, he said. and
I just-
it's too much.
I just want to ensure that this advisory board is not
yes,
unintentionally becoming overburdened with stuff that doesn't belong on our table.
well, yeah, I mean, my understanding, what I've been told, and this is what I've been told, so it's like hearsay 12 times. Is that the original reason for this committee was because the planning board was too busy to be able to do the kind of work because ultimately we're doing legwork for the planning board, which is the body that has to have the public hearings and recommend the proposals and the purpose of this would be to do that legwork and get a broader number of voices engaged in the process of making proposed changes and bringing those to first to the planning board and the select board. And that would, it seems to me, there would be no place else to take a rewrite of the subdivision ordinance. And the subdivision ordinance, the planning board has to administer that just as much as it does the LUZO.
And this board or advisory board, I would add, when it was born,
Mhm.
was out of a select board meeting and a discussion that I had put forth that our land use zoning ordinance was becoming unwieldy.
Mm-hmm,
that it was growing and growing and growing exponentially.
mm-hmm,
And we had town employees whose jobs were becoming undoable,
Mhm.
basically, because there was so much to manage. So we put together an advisory board to review the entire land use zoning ordinance
Mhm.
for conflicts, contradictions, items in the LUZO that itself that no longer applied to our town as our town evolved, and to make it a more workable document. Since its inception, when we finally formed this illustrious board, advisory board, it became a repository for anyone and everyone who thought that it might be a good idea to include this in the LUZO. Why don't we have that in the LUZO? And our agenda over the last, how many years, Kim? 7, 8 years,
So,
has had stuff dumped into it that you guys need to figure this out. What would be the best way to have this, and how can we include it in the LUZO? And let's create a warrant to bring to town meeting. Not the least of which, and the most latest, was the short-term rental ordinance.
Mhm.
Everything on our agenda got kind of pushed
So
aside
that didn't
because
get brought to this.
this got to be the big priority for the town, so everything that we were working on, the subdivision ordinance and everything else, the shoreland zoning and everything got kind of squished aside to bring focus onto this
Short-term rental.
short-term rental ordinance. And so, and I don't mean to cry, but this committee has been abused in the last 5 or 6 years as a dumping ground or repository for the town's woes, and let's fix it and put it in the LUZO. The result has been, the LUZO has gone, instead of, has gone and gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's why I mentioned in meetings such as this, that let's create a list of what we're going to work on, and like to-do list, bring us your ideas. We'll put it in the queue. But don't expect it to be done this year.
Mhm.
We might get to it this year. But to try and reorganize and focus what this group is all about.
Well, I guess I would have a couple thoughts about that. First of all, this group did not, I don't think this group handled the short-term rental. That was a
They
select
did in the
board.
beginning,
started it.
until the
Okay.
select board determined that
Oh, yeah, you're
they
right.
needed
You're
to create
right.
a separate
Yes.
subcommittee.
right.
Because we, as a collective advisory board, weren't doing anything.
Okay, so. If, first of all, with respect to growing ordinances and statutes, and I think that is the way of the world. I don't think that's something that's because we're not doing the job right. I think every year the legislature passes new laws that have to be integrated. I think every year the demands
I
and
agree.
the requirements on the town evolve, and you need
Yeah.
to respond to those somehow. And I guess I would say, if it's not this committee that's trying to process changes, additions, sometimes improvements, then who will do it?
Well, that's a determination that is yet to be made. I can only speak to why this committee was created, what its purpose was, and we deal with town ordinances. We have no control over state legislature, the laws that get passed, we accept what they give us. We implement them in the town as we need to, but as far as the ordinances that are serving this town, by and large, we are the music makers, we are the dreamers of dreams, as Willy Wonka said. We get to determine what our town is going to be and how we choose to regulate it within the confines of those state regulations. So again, my plea for this committee 8 years ago, 9 years ago, and to this day is to make our LUZO less wieldy, more user-friendly, and more comfortable for our citizens in this community to deal with. It's, to me, that simple.
Well, I would second that motion. I personally would second that motion. I think that that's a fine goal. I'm just not sure. I mean, for example, I think you could argue that the subdivision rewrite is exactly consonant with that goal. Because it is difficult to manage and handle in the way in which it's written now. And it doesn't help people parse through it easily. And I would love to have all of our ordinances be as plainly spoken and as clarifying as possible. I think
Me
we
too.
should put everything we do through that grinder. It
Yeah.
should, at the end of it, say, is this the best we can do? Is this the best we can do for the public?
Well, that's why I only bit off one piece. That known as the land use zoning ordinance. If the subdivision ordinance is to be incorporated into the land use zoning ordinance, then so be it. If it's a standalone ordinance, then perhaps they need an advisory board to look specifically at that and not filter what we're trying to accomplish, water it down, if you will, or whatever, or detract from what our specified goal was and is.
Right.
And to have a group that wishes to, like when they took the short-term rental thing and created a subcommittee to go and do that. Great, create a subdivision committee to go and work on the subdivision ordinance.
I mean, you can't.
It's just,
But
this
the problem that I
committee
have-
cannot be all
but
things to
We
all
know,
people.
But we only have so many people who are gonna show
I
up to
was
do
gonna
this work.
say, you can't get people and create all the committees. But not only that, I mean, we started out, we were trying to get somebody from each town, each little community in the town,
Yeah.
desert. We can't get anyone from Otter Creek to come over here and sit and participate, same
Yeah.
with over in Pretty Marsh and that. But regardless, the subdivision ordinance needs to be rewritten because we are not complying with the state. So.
Oh, I agree.
that
And
needs
it's
to
the
be done.
planning
I
board
absolutely agree.
that has to.
You won't hear any argument from me on that.
That needs to be done, we are out of state compliance.
The quarry ordinance, the quarry ordinance again, that's the
The
planning
ordinance,
board.
That also was tasked by us as a committee, by you, the board of selectmen, to do that. We got a moratorium on the quarry license.
Yeah.
That's how this committee came about, because we had to do the quarry ordinance. That's where it began, was with this quarry ordinance. That's how this committee became.
But no, you two. as
We've
an
lost
advisor-
our way.
You two as an advisor to this
And I
group-
need to excuse myself because.
But I think
I
your
have a
goal of
just have a
what
dinner
the
date.
work
I do
product
have a
should
meeting.
look like
I have
and
no
do in
reason
the
to-
end is a good, and Joe, I think it's.
With a friend of mine.
Yeah,
That I met, was gonna meet at 6 o'clock. So if you'll all excuse me.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see
Thanks,
you.
Rick.
Thank you for your time, appreciate it.
See you soon.
Thanks for
See you,
coming.
Rick.
But no, as an advisor to this group and others, it seems as though if there were another group, say for subdivision organs, you'd be sort of repeating yourself, because there's such an overlap. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the subdivision is a land use tool, so first of all, there's an overlap there, but I think again, you know, at the time that we started working on all these things, the planning board was busy doing reviews, and they're still busy doing reviews. So,
Right.
the biggest overlap is making sure that, you know, because the current land use ordinance says, you know, we have to have, the planning board has to hold the public hearing and vote to approve it. I mean, I just wrote down, is that something we should look at? Is the way the structure of the town is gonna work, it's gonna change. But, I mean, yeah, I don't, it's either gonna be the planning board that looks at subdivision or it's gonna be this group.
All right, I'm
And
just thinking,
technically, it's gonna be both anyway. So,
yeah, I'm just thinking the most effective use of your time would be to minimize the
Yes.
groups that you have to interact with and keep
Absolutely.
repeating yourself and addressing similar issues.
Yes, I think, I mean, I appreciate it's a more of an ordinance advisory committee.
Yeah.
Than a land use advisory committee, because it's nice, Kim, if you use the sewer and septic inspection thing that we just talked about, like, there's something that needs to be changed. We could change it. We're gonna change it, but somebody else, citizens need to review it and say, yes, this makes sense.
Right.
And then we can talk
But
about it.
that doesn't go to planning.
Right, that wouldn't go to planning board, that wouldn't necessarily be,
Or with
I
the
mean,
mobile home ordinance.
we'll talk to the board of selectmen about it, but they're like the ultimate policymakers. It's nice to have other citizens kind of weigh in on this policy before it even gets to the board level, because they're.
I mean, it goes through a lot of chains of boards and public hearings and, you know, notifications and, I mean, it's up to the people, you know, town's voters and the town's people that come to these meetings.
Right.
I mean, I'm happy if Rick thinks we should, to attend a select board meeting and talk about with the select board as a whole, what do you perceive the scope of our responsibilities to be? And if they say, yeah, we agree with Rick, let's not do subdivisions, then good luck with subdivisions. But the planning board has got to handle them. They come to the planning board and the planning board can't say, no, we'd rather not, because it's not in the LUZO. That's, the planning board would, I'm sure, be happy to get rid of dealing with Coria anytime soon, but they can't, so,
Well, the planning board has jurisdiction over subdivisions. It's gotta be
yeah,
in you guys' wheelhouse.
yeah, that would be my sense. But I agree with the principle that making the ordinance as user-friendly as possible should be one of our highest priorities. It'll be, everybody,
And, somebody needs to have an application to file to make sure they comply with everything and the expectation of what to submit when you go through your checklist. I mean, we have no application. I tell people, you gotta look at section blah, blah, blah.
yeah.
And just hit everything with an answer, and provide something.
I think that would help the public a great deal if we had a comprehensive set of applications
Yes,
that went with all of these sections.
yes,
That,
totally agree. Been
okay,
asking for applications for years.
hey. No pressure. Okay, are we ready to conclude tonight's
Yes.
fun conversation?
So
Nick, thank you for coming.
And I was here not as a landowner, Baron, as I'm on the Summer Residents Association.
Uh-huh.
I don't think we've ever shown up to one of these meetings, so I thought I should go.
Oh, good.
What's your name, sir?
Ned, you know me, Ned Knoll. How did you forget?
I'm sorry. I see way too many people. My bad. I am sorry.
So, NALLE.
Yep, I know where you are.
Are you sufficiently impressed?
Yes, I am.
Here.
Thank you for welcoming me.
Yes.
We're supposed to have a
And
small-
somebody that's interested in it, regardless if you're year round or not,
That's good, though.
your community.
Well, thank you. We're all very interested, but I wasn't here for very.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, well, that's right church, wrong pew. So.